Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Max Verstappen officially confirms his driver number for the 2026 season, but his old technical director Adrian Newey, now at Aston Martin, is reportedly cooking up something very special indeed for the upcoming season. Yes, ground effect is gone, but apparently Newey might have found a way to still bring it back to a certain extent and generate way more downforce than Aston Martin's rivals next season. Is there any truth behind this story? Lots to get into. If I want to throw to your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. We're going to start here. This is Daniel Ricciardo, that is Max Verstappen, and this is the number 3 Red Bull, and we're going back to a number 3 Red Bull after some speculation, given that Max is no longer number 1, he can't drive with that number anymore. Back in the day, it was mandated, I think like pre-2014-ish, it was mandated that wherever you finish in the championship, that would be the number that you took. So 2009, Hamilton drove with the number 1, 2011, Hamilton drove with the number 3, both of those numbers of course have now been driven by Verstappen and will be in the upcoming season because Max is going to be MV3, not, notably enough, MV33 when he was no longer number 1, which is of course reserved for the champion. Lando Norris will take that number, he confirmed the day after winning the World Championship, so Max has to go back. Now I think many expected him to go back to number 33, but it's been confirmed that it will simply be the number 3. So there's been a lot of talk about this. Some are happy about this, some are not so happy about this. I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Max's reasoning is quite interesting. So Verstappen.com, they do an official announcement. This is what it's going to look like as well. There's a couple of different graphical versions that are worth looking at too. But Max says, it will not be number 33. My favourite number has always been 3, apart from number 1. So we can now swap, it will be number 3. Max reveals of his end-of-year interview with Viaplay, number 33 was always fine, but I like just the 1-3 better than the 2. I've always said it represented double the luck, but I've already had my luck in Formula 1, he says. So thought that was an interesting assessment, really. Now, could he actually do this was a question. The FIA would need to agree. Under previous rules, changing was not possible because Daniel Ricciardo has not been out of the sport long enough. It's still reserved for him for 2 years, and he left less than 2 years ago. But Daniel Ricciardo, who used number 3 till he retired after 2024, cooperated. Kind of a funny way to describe it, a very Dutch way to describe it, I think, really. Because I'm sure Daniel Ricciardo was very happy, I mean, I imagine he was anyway, to say, yeah, sure, Max, you want to have the number 3 that I used? It would be a pleasure. I'm sure that Ricciardo was very much on board with making this happen, but I just find it funny the way that they described that he cooperated. It almost sounds like he cooperated under duress, that they somehow forced him to, but I don't imagine that was the case, thus enabling Max to sport his favourite number on next year's Red Bull. So there you go. Consider this a reintroduction, say Red Bull Racing. 65,000 likes on this. Drive at number 3, Max Verstappen. Now, it is interesting. People have looked at this because, well, as you'll notice, it's not perfectly symmetrical, this number 3. There's an element missing in the top right. Some have said, I don't know, I think people are seeing things to a degree, but some have said that Max is trying to keep the 1 in here somehow. One of those ideas might be that in this little cutout on the top right, you can imagine that this section with highlighting with the mouse could be a number 1. I mean, it could also be a number 7, but you see in like the, let's say the blank space, you could imagine there could be a number 1 over there. The other way that he could fit a number 1 in is this. So imagine it's upside down. You can, if imagine there was a line down here, you would like, that would be a number 1 in there. I don't really think that's what he's going for. I think it's just the number 3. But anyway, intrigued to your thoughts. And also Isaac Hadjar, it's the same story there with this cutout element also. Looks less like that would look like a number 1 than the Verstappen one did. But yeah, of course they want to make sure that upside down it's viewed not the same. So Isaac Hadjar number 6. That's his logo for the upcoming season. That will be on his Red Bull, as we know he's getting the promotion. Some intrigue though, because, you know, Max number 33, for a long time that was synonymous with his brand. Moving away from that is definitely a decision. It means he has more opportunity to sell different merchandise, probably, so that's one thing. But he did tweet this in 2014 when he was about to come into the sport. Since I was a young kid, I was racing around with this number, so I thought it was nice to keep that in F1 as well, hashtag 33. Now, at the time, he could not use number 3 because it was taken, so he had to go for number 33. But still, I mean, the general logic around around Max seems to be, and his Twitter at here, as you can see, is still Max33 Verstappen. So, like, he never changed that when he was champion, so maybe he's going to change it now, I don't know. But the idea was he always wanted to run number 3 because that's always what he had when he was a kid, and it was always his favourite number, which I'm sure is true. But this tweet, as you can see, he has used 33 before. Obviously, this is a rather long time ago. But yeah, nonetheless, a key part of his development, his childhood, his racing career. This is a little mock-up. Obviously, next year's car will look rather different to this, and who knows what the livery will look like, but it's a Red Bull we can probably reasonably well predict. So if you're a Verstappen fan, you're happy about this change? You supporting the number 3 for Max Verstappen, or would you have preferred it to go back to 33? Look, change is always weird at the end of the day. I think we're going to get used to it, but there are some questions about the direction that Red Bull are moving in general. Does MV3 have the same aura as MV33 or MV1? I think it's also just worth pointing this out. I know that I talk about this quite a lot, and times change relatively slowly, so you don't always see it happen all at once. But the point we've made now for some time on the channel is that Red Bull have changed quite a lot since the death of Dietrich Mateschitz. As I say, it's not been something that's happened overnight, but a load of their top people are now gone. We're going to discuss Adrian Newey in a second, but Christian Horner's gone, Helmut Marko's about to go, Will Courtenay, he's gone, Jonathan Wheatley's gone, Rob Marshall is gone, a number of other mechanics for Verstappen and everything, they're gone as well. So, look, Red Bull are different to how they used to be. The way they're managed and run is different to how it used to be. With no Horner in charge, it has a different feel of an organisation. And look, they still did very well towards the end of this most recent season. They nearly pulled off the greatest comeback ever, with the help of Max Verstappen, of course. But, you know, they nearly made it happen as a team and as a driver combination. But in the end, they didn't. They lost both titles, and there are serious questions on next year's competitiveness, whether they really gave 2025 a good go because they know that next year is not going to be so good. Questions on their engine project, but also just general questions on their development as an organisation, right? Like, they don't feel the same as they used to. Not to say that that means that they're going to be 5th in the constructors, 4th in the drivers, or whatever. I know that there's been some people talking about that today, but I just thought this was interesting, right? So Red Bull come out with this today. Oracle Red Bull Racing meet Boxy. They've got like a mascot. This is their Oracle Red Bull Racing mascot. And then he has like a heart emoji that has loads of hearts coming out. I'm like, this, you know, this isn't Red Bull, right? Under Horner, this would not be how it is. And maybe it doesn't matter, but I just think it's interesting how Red Bull have changed over time. They're no longer that fearsome machine, ruthless machine that they once were. I think certainly with Marko gone as well, who's been pretty ruthless when it comes to driver decisions, certainly at their sister team, we're going to see a little bit more of that. Whether that's going to have any trickle-down consequences to what actually happens on track, that's a good question, but I just thought it was worth pointing out given everything that's currently happening at Red Bull. So yeah, Max fans, number 33, number 1, number 3, there are going to be quite a few. Look, people can bring the old Daniel Ricciardo merch out of the cupboard and that will kind of work relatively well. Do wonder what, you know, this bloke is thinking about right now. I mean, as we know, if he decided to keep up this list of Grand Prix 1, you know, his back is going to be filled up quite a long time ago, right? So I'm not sure how much he's thinking about that or if he is at all. A couple of other things to say on Max just before we get there. These are the confirmed dates for launching of the cars in 2026. There's very different dates here, which is semi-unusual, mainly because on the 26th of January, that is Barcelona pre-season testing. That will be behind closed doors. But, well, there will be photographers, there will be rumours, we will talk about them when the time comes. Some teams are announcing their car before then, or at least revealing the livery before then. We will likely see what the livery looks like on a mock-up version. A couple of interesting things on the livery, actually. I believe they're mandating a certain percentage of the car is covered by paint, because that has not been the case in recent years. Teams, especially when weight is so critical, have really been pushing the limits of how much paint they can get away with, and making the car black is being an optimal idea, or at least like basically looks like carbon fiber. Over recent years. This year, yes, the weight limit is down, I think, to 768. But it's still going to be tough to reach that number. It really is. With the massively heavy battery electrical components and just the first year of the regulations, it's always going to be a challenge. So I think the teams are going to have a hard time getting down to the weight limit this season, certainly at the start of the year. As a result, if we let the teams do what they want in terms of liveries, a lot of them would be very carbon. But I think the FIA and Formula 1 are mandating like 50% of it at least has to be covered in paint. So we are going to see, I think, at least some relatively interesting liveries. Aston Martin will reveal their actual car on the 9th of February. So we get to see it for real at that date, and we'll discuss a little bit more on that car in just a second. Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, we don't know yet. Will they reveal a livery before the behind closed doors test? Because let's be honest, people are going to be taking pictures of it anyway, although they might use a different livery for the actual season. Time will tell what the rest of the grid decide to do. The other thing on Max, he was talking in this Viaplay interview about Hamilton's struggles this season, because there's been some talk, it's not gone well for Hamilton the first year. Yeah, there was the sprint in China, since then went downhill. Yeah, they gave up on their car a long time ago. But for Hamilton, is it just going to be too late, right? I think in terms of his individual performance is not where it was, and maybe if he has a championship winning car underneath him, he could still put together a championship challenge, and I think Hamilton on his day, in a winnable, in a car that's capable of winning, can absolutely compete with Verstappen, compete with Leclerc, compete with the best. And we've seen that on occasion even this season, races like Silverstone where Leclerc was nowhere and Hamilton was fighting Hülkenberg for a podium. Such was the strength of the Ferrari this season, let's be honest. But do I think that Hamilton would be able to have the consistency over 24 races to put together a title challenge? I think my optimism around that scenario is waning to a certain extent. And when Schumacher joined Ferrari and had a massive task on his hands to help turn things around, it took him a good few years to help, let's say, integrate into the team, help move the team away from some of the issues they were struggling with, get them back to the top. And it's just, if it was to take Hamilton 3 or 4 years, as it kind of did for Schumacher, to make that work at Ferrari, then has he got the time? Has he got the patience to make that happen? Some have suggested, maybe he should just call it a day and say, it was a pleasure, but it's just not going to work out. There's not enough time to make this happen at Ferrari, at least what's left in his career, which I understand that logic as well. I don't think Hamilton would do that. I don't think it would make sense for either party, at least at the moment. So Verstappen says, it hurts, right? It's not nice to see Hamilton struggling like that at Ferrari, but quitting, I don't see about that. He doesn't give up. He'll definitely be there next year. Those were the comments made between the pair of them. But speaking of Aston Martin in the context of Verstappen, there have been lots of questions on what their driver lineup is going to be. Look, Alonso is 44. He has officially now got a child on the way. I believe his child is due early middle of next year, something like that. So congratulations to him and his girlfriends, and hopefully all goes well. But, he's got a kid on the way, right? So Alonso's finally going to be a father. You can't imagine that he will be staying around in Formula 1 too much longer after that, at least with the context of that in mind. Look, if he's Verstappen's age, then sure, he's not going to go anywhere. But given the state of things, you'd imagine that Alonso has maximum 2 more seasons left, I think. It's probably just 1. It might be 2, depending on how things go. Lance Stroll, to his credit, actually delivered a great drive in Abu Dhabi to close out the season, showed some passion, showed some grit, showed some resilience. It was nice to see, and showed some energy at the end of the Grand Prix when he made a fantastic overtake on the final lap, I think over Ollie Bearman, to move up to P9. But is Lance Stroll going to stay there forever? He's been in Formula 1 so long at this point, it feels like Lance Stroll. And look, I don't think he's as bad as people tend to believe, but he certainly hasn't got the talent to deserve being on the grid for a decade. I think I would put it that way. There's the potential enticement of Aston Martin's projects in the World Endurance Championship. Maybe he goes and plays tennis. People say it looks like Carlos Alcaraz. So, I don't know. There's other options out there. But Aston Martin will need 1, if not multiple drivers in the next few years. Of course, Max Verstappen is absolutely top of their list. Why would he not be? It may be part of their decision-making when it comes to Christian Horner, just because there are rumours that Aston are basically saying not so keen on getting Horner in to be our CEO, while Adrian Newey is effectively the team principal, because maybe Jos Verstappen, Max Verstappen, the entourage wouldn't be so happy with that. So that's one option, but they would like to get Max for sure. If they can't, Ted Kravitz thinks you just try and get Leclerc, and I'm sure that they're interested in Leclerc, and if Ferrari don't deliver next year, you could absolutely see that happening a few rounds into next season, but time will tell. Now, could Aston Martin deliver a good car? Because that's critical, right? If Max sees Red Bull struggling and Aston Martin are doing better than Red Bull, or if Aston Martin are doing better than Ferrari, Verstappen and Leclerc might end up competing for that seat in 2027 and beyond. Before we discuss this, it's worth very much keeping in mind these regulations next year especially. Now, the engine rules can be changed, but also can continue to be developed. There is no engine freeze, so this could change over time. But the last few years in Formula 1, it's been primarily an aerodynamic championship. The engines have been roughly the same. But it feels like, certainly for the first time in a long time, Formula 1 next year will be much more of an engine formula. So whatever Newey is cooking up, if the Honda engine doesn't deliver, there will be no hope for Aston Martin, for Alonso, for Newey, etc, etc. We saw that with Red Bull in the Renault days. You guys know how it goes. But the rumour is that Newey has found some sort of loophole. Now, would this be a surprise? Absolutely not. Newey even implied it, I want to say, a few months ago when he talked about these regs. He talked about the same thing in 2022. He said, so many pages of these regulations, they're so complicated, there's not going to be any flexibility. But when he looked closer, he found some ideas. He found some flexibility. He found a way to exploit advantages. And he said a couple of months back that after looking at 2026, when he feared the same, he actually found himself in a similar position. So that implied that he's got some ideas, for sure. Now, this all comes down to the floor and ground effect. So now, I just wanted to quickly say this article is controversial because firstly, it's coming out of the Italian press. Secondly, this article apparently gave different sources initially, but has now edited those sources out and is citing different sources. For example, they say here it is still rumoured from English sources. So, look, they've not deleted the article, so they've not gone back entirely and said that this is all BS, but they apparently have changed a couple of things. So it's worth keeping in mind that this is all pinch of salt stuff. But it wouldn't be a massive shock if Newey has found some sort of ideas. So, there's active aero next year. The front and the rear wings will have a cornering mode and a straight line speed mode, which is interesting, probably problematic. We discussed it yesterday in some detail. But the floor is now effectively flat. The Venturi tunnels are gone. So ground effect, at least in its extreme as it's been at over the last couple of years, that is now gone. The porpoising issues, the ride height problems, they should be eliminated to a certain extent as well. But it's not like ground effect as a concept has gone away. If you can use very clever aero to seal the sides of the floor and create a low pressure zone under the car, you can still generate downforce in that way. While everyone else has been focused on making the hybrid engine work at 50%, Newey has reportedly been working on mechanically sealing the floor. There is talk of a passive system that by exploiting the movement of the suspension, here the experience with Williams active suspension in the 90s. Of course, active suspension is banned and it's not coming back, but Newey does have experience in this area, and also, as we know, was the key driving force behind designing the suspension concept that became standard in 2022 and beyond, would be able to close the floor towards the asphalt in corners much more than its rivals, recreating the Venturi effect that the FIA wanted to ban. So I think the idea is that because of the active aerodynamics, there might be a way with a clever suspension design that when the active aero is in cornering modes, the car would be lowered more than you would expect by the pure aerodynamics. You know, again, I don't know how this would be doable. But I think that is what the article is getting at, is that by using clever suspension geometry, which again, if there's ever talk about ground effect, suspension becomes an incredibly critical component, and we know that Newey designed the totality of it for 2022 and saw a lot of success with the Red Bull cars that thereafter followed. So it would follow that Newey may once again be spending a good portion of his time right now designing the suspension for 2026 and trying to find ways to, well, lower the car closer to the ground in cornering modes, possibly, than other teams are able to, generating more downforce as a result, sealing the floor in certain ways. Look, who knows how it would work in reality, but just to compare, this is what the 2026 floor looks like here on the top left-hand side. there are no Venturi tunnels that we have been used to over the last few years. It is roughly flat, but there is still the possibility to use ground effect if you know what you're doing, and it turns out that Adrian Newey generally knows what he's doing. So yeah, intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. It would be so exciting what they come up with next year. I think it's really interesting what cars roll out of the garage in Bahrain testing. Certainly when we turn up to Australia, we're going to see some ideas and hear some ideas, I'm sure, from Barcelona at the end of January. And other teams will have ideas as well. But I'm sure that Newey will have come up with something that's unusual, something that's unorthodox, something that the other teams haven't considered. Whether it's this, time will only tell on that one. Whether it's enough, right? Whether it works, whether it's enough to actually potentially make up for a deficit to the Mercedes power that we feel could be plausible. You know, is it going to be a Brawn GP 2009? Unlikely, to be honest, but never totally impossible. So, as ever, intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.